The colony world of New Geneva was beautiful in the morning light. Twin suns rose over green mountains and silver cities. Children walked to school. Workers traveled to offices and factories. Farmers tended crops in the fertile valleys. 6 million humans lived peaceful lives on this world, far from Earth but connected to it by bonds of blood and culture. Commander Maya Torres stood on the balcony of the Colonial Defense Center and watched the sunrise. She held a cup of coffee in her hands and smiled at the peaceful scene below. New Geneva had been her home for 15 years. She had watched it grow from a small settlement into a thriving colony. She was proud of what humanity had built here. Her communicator beeped. She looked at the screen and frowned. Unknown ships had entered the system. Many unknown ships. How many? She asked as she walked quickly to the command center. Over 300 vessels, her lieutenant reported. His face was pale. They matched the profile of Vexari warships. Torres felt her stomach drop. The Vexari Dominion was one of the most powerful empires in the galaxy. They controlled hundreds of star systems and had crushed dozens of species under their rule. Humanity had traded with them, negotiated with them, tried to maintain peaceful relations. But everyone knew the Vexari respected only strength. And humanity was not strong, not compared to the ancient empires of the galaxy. Send a message to Earth, Torres ordered. Tell them what is happening, and try to contact the Vexari fleet. Find out what they want. The response came quickly. A Vexari admiral appeared on the main screen. He was tall and thin, with blue-gray skin and 4 arms. His eyes were completely black, and they showed no emotion at all. I am Admiral Vexros of the Vexari Dominion, he said. Your colony exists in space that we have claimed. You will surrender immediately. All humans will be processed according to Dominion law. Torres kept her voice steady. This is Commander Maya Torres of the New Geneva Colonial Defense Force. This world is a legal human settlement under Galactic Treaty. We have done nothing to threaten the Dominion. Surely we can discuss this peacefully. Admiral Vexros made a sound that might have been laughter. Discuss? Humans do not discuss with the Dominion. Humans obey. Your species is young and weak. You have no fleet to protect you. You have no allies who will risk war for you. You are alone. We are citizens of Earth, Torres said firmly. An attack on us is an attack on all humanity. Yes, Vexros replied. That is precisely the point. The screen went dark. Torres turned to her officers. Begin evacuation procedures. Get as many civilians to the shelters as possible. And keep that transmission to Earth open. Whatever happens, Earth needs to see it. The Vexari ships descended on New Geneva like a swarm of insects. They moved with perfect coordination, surrounding the planet and cutting off all escape routes. Landing craft dropped from the warships, carrying thousands of Vexari soldiers. They wore black armor and carried weapons that could cut through steel like paper. The Colonial Defense Force fought back. They had only light weapons and a few hundred trained soldiers, but they fought with everything they had. Torres led the defense of the capital city herself. She watched her people die bravely, hopelessly, against an enemy they could not defeat. The battle lasted 6 hours. When it was over, the Vexari controlled every city on the planet. They herded the surviving humans into central squares and stadium grounds. Families clutched each other in fear. Children cried for parents they could not find. The elderly and sick collapsed from exhaustion. And through it all, the Vexari recorded everything. Admiral Vexros appeared on every screen on the planet. He also appeared on screens across the entire galaxy. The Vexari had tapped into the galactic communication network and broadcast their signal to every species, every world, every ship that could receive it. Citizens of the galaxy, Vexros announced. Watch carefully. Today the Vexari Dominion teaches a lesson that all must learn. There is no place in our galaxy for species that do not know their place. Humanity has refused to pay tribute. They have refused to submit. They believe they are special, that they have rights. Today we show them the truth. On Earth, billions of people stopped what they were doing. They gathered around screens in homes and offices, in schools and hospitals, in parks and restaurants. They watched as the broadcast began. The Vexari executed the humans of New Geneva in groups. They used energy weapons that left nothing behind but ash. They killed soldiers and civilians alike. They killed men and women, old and young. They filmed the faces of their victims in their final moments. They filmed the tears and the screams and the prayers. Torres was among the last to die. She stood tall and refused to look away from the cameras. "Earth," she said clearly. "Remember us. Remember what they did, and make them pay." A Vexari soldier shot her in the back before she could say more. The killing continued for 3 days. The Vexari wanted the galaxy to see every moment. They wanted everyone to understand that resistance to the Dominion meant complete destruction. They laughed as they worked. They made jokes about human weakness. They competed to see who could kill the most in an hour. 6,200,000 humans died on New Geneva. Not a single person was left alive. Not a single building was left standing. When the Vexari finished, they burned the cities to ash and poisoned the soil so nothing would ever grow there again. Admiral Vexros appeared one final time. "Let this be a lesson to all species. Pay your tribute, know your place, or suffer the fate of the humans of New Geneva." The broadcast ended. On Earth, the silence was absolute. No one spoke. No one moved. Parents held their children close. Old people wept quietly. Young people stared at screens with eyes that had seen too much. Then, slowly, something changed. The tears stopped. The fear faded. In its place came something else. Something cold and hard and ancient. Something that humanity had tried very hard to forget. In every city, on every continent, people began to move. They walked to government buildings and military bases. They did not shout or protest. They simply gathered and waited. Millions of people, standing in perfect silence, waiting for their leaders to speak. The United Earth Council convened an emergency session. 200 representatives from every nation on Earth sat in a vast chamber. On the walls, screens showed the faces of New Geneva's dead. 6 million names scrolled endlessly across the ceiling. President Samuel Okonkwo stood at the central podium. He was an old man, a former diplomat who had spent his life building peace. His hands trembled as he gripped the podium. 3 days ago, he said, his voice barely above a whisper, we watched 6 million of our people die. We watched them murdered for entertainment. We watched an empire laugh as they burned our children. He paused. The chamber was utterly silent. The Vexari believe we are weak, Okonkwo continued. They believe we will cower and submit. They believe we will pay tribute and accept our place as slaves. They believe this because they have never seen humanity at war. His voice grew stronger. His hands stopped trembling. They do not know our history. They do not know what we did to each other for 10,000 years. They do not know about the trenches of Verdun or the beaches of Normandy. They do not know about Stalingrad or Hiroshima. They do not know that we nearly destroyed ourselves a dozen times with weapons we built for the sole purpose of killing our own kind. He looked around the chamber. Every face was hard. Every eye was dry. We chose peace, Okonkwo said. We chose to put away our weapons and reach for the stars. We chose to be better than our ancestors. We chose to believe that the universe would reward our kindness. He took a deep breath. We were wrong. He pressed a button on the podium. Red lights appeared throughout the chamber. I invoke Article Omega of the Earth Defense Charter, Okonkwo declared. Total war authorization. From this moment forward, the United Earth Council transfers all authority to the Combined Military Command. Our economy, our industry, our science, our people. Everything will serve one purpose, and one purpose only. He looked directly at the cameras that broadcast his words to every human being alive. The Vexari Dominion killed 6 million of our people and broadcast it for entertainment. They wanted to teach the galaxy a lesson about human weakness. We are going to teach them a different lesson. His voice dropped to a whisper that somehow reached every ear. They should have killed us all. In shipyards across the solar system, construction began immediately. Factories that had made cars and computers switched to producing weapons and armor. Laboratories that had researched medicine and agriculture began designing warships and missiles. Universities that had taught philosophy and art became training centers for soldiers. On Mars, the sleeping weapons of a darker age were awakened. Designs that humanity had sworn never to use again were pulled from sealed vaults. Scientists who had dedicated their lives to peace now worked around the clock on instruments of destruction. On the moons of Jupiter, mining operations expanded 1,000-fold. Precious metals and rare elements flowed toward Earth in endless streams. Every resource humanity possessed was redirected toward a single goal, and in homes across Earth and the colonies, 6 million candles burned, one for each person lost on New Geneva, one for each name that scrolled across the memorial walls, one for each soul that cried out for justice. The Vexari had wanted to send a message to the galaxy. They had wanted to show that resistance was futile. They had wanted to prove that humanity was just another weak species to be conquered and enslaved. They had succeeded in sending a message, but not the one they intended. The message that spread across the galaxy was simple. Humanity was coming, and there would be no mercy. 6 months had passed since the massacre at New Geneva. 6 months since humanity had watched its people burn. 6 months since the galaxy had learned what human rage looked like. Admiral Sarah Chen stood on the observation deck of the newly constructed warship Remembrance. She was 53 years old, with gray streaks in her black hair and lines on her face that had not been there a year ago. She had been a peacetime officer, commanding exploration vessels and diplomatic missions. She had never expected to lead a war fleet. But then again, none of them had expected this. Through the massive windows, she could see the Earth shipyards stretching across thousands of kilometers of space. Hundreds of warships floated in formation, their hulls dark and angular. They were not beautiful ships. They were not elegant or graceful like the vessels of the older galactic species. They were ugly and brutal, designed with only one purpose in mind. "Admiral?" her aide said, approaching with a data tablet. "Final construction reports. The fleet is ready." Chen took the tablet and scrolled through the numbers. 187 warships, 50,000 fighters and bombers, 2 million soldiers in transport vessels. Enough firepower to crack planets open like eggs. It was not enough. The Vexari had over 1,000 warships. They had controlled their empire for 10,000 years. They had crushed civilizations that had been reaching for the stars when humanity was still living in caves. But humanity had something the Vexari did not understand. Something that had made humans the most dangerous predators on their home world. Something that had allowed them to survive ice ages and plagues and wars that should have destroyed them. Humans adapted, humans learned, and humans never, ever forgot. In the 6 months since New Geneva, human scientists had studied every piece of Vexari technology they could find. They had reverse-engineered their weapons and shields. They had found the weaknesses in their designs. And they had built something new. The weapons aboard the Remembrance were unlike anything the galaxy had seen. Missiles that could change their approach patterns in flight, adapting to enemy countermeasures faster than any computer could track. Railguns that accelerated metal slugs to fractions of light speed, punching through shields that were designed to stop energy weapons. Electronic warfare systems that could infiltrate enemy networks and turn their own ships against them. But the most terrifying weapon was not made of metal or energy. It was made of flesh and blood and burning rage. 2 million soldiers waited in the transport ships. Every one of them was a volunteer. Every one of them had memorized the names of at least 100 victims of New Geneva. Every one of them had watched the broadcast and sworn an oath to avenge the dead. They did not fear death. They welcomed it, because death in battle meant joining their fallen brothers and sisters. It meant proving that human lives could not be taken without cost. Chen walked to her command chair and sat down. Around her, the bridge crew worked with quiet efficiency. No one spoke unnecessary words. No one joked or laughed. The time for laughter had ended 6 months ago. "Open a channel to all ships," she ordered. Her face appeared on screens throughout the fleet. 2 million soldiers stopped what they were doing and listened. "Today we leave Earth," Chen said. "Many of us will not return. The Vexari are powerful. They have ruled this part of the galaxy for millennia. They have destroyed species that were older and wiser than us." She paused and looked directly into the camera. "But they have never fought humans. They have never faced an enemy that does not fear death. They have never met a species that fights not for territory or resources, but for vengeance. They think they know what war looks like. They are wrong." She stood up from her chair. 6 million of our people died on New Geneva. They died because we were not strong enough to protect them. They died because we chose peace when we should have chosen strength. That was our failure. Our shame. Her voice hardened. "We cannot bring them back. We cannot undo what was done. But we can make sure it never happens again. We can show the galaxy that human lives have value. That attacking our people means death. That there is no place in this universe where our enemies can hide from justice." She raised her fist. "For New Geneva. For Earth. For humanity." Throughout the fleet, 2 million voices responded as one. The sound was like thunder rolling across space. For New Geneva, for Earth, for humanity, the fleet began to move. Engines flared to life across hundreds of ships. The formation turned toward the edge of the solar system, toward the jump points that would take them to Vexari space. On planets across the galaxy, alien species watched the human fleet depart. They had been watching humanity closely since the massacre. They had expected tears and pleas for mercy. They had expected desperate attempts at negotiation. They had expected humans to accept their place as a minor species in a galaxy ruled by ancient empires. Instead, they had watched humans transform. In 6 months, humanity had built a war fleet from almost nothing. They had converted their entire economy to military production. They had mobilized their population with a unity that seemed almost religious in its intensity. Ambassador Corvex of the Telani Union sat in his office on the diplomatic station and watched the human ships pass. He was old by Telani standards, over 300 years of age. He had seen many species rise and fall. He had watched the Vexari crush rebellion after rebellion, but he had never seen anything like this. "What do you think will happen?" his aide asked. Corvex was silent for a long moment. "The Vexari have 1,000 warships," he said finally. "The humans have less than 200. By all logic, this should be a slaughter. But I have studied human history." Corvex's 4 eyes blinked slowly. "I have read about their wars. The trenches filled with poison gas. The cities burned with fire from the sky. The weapons that could destroy entire nations in an instant." He turned to face his aide. "The Vexari wage war for dominance. They fight to make others submit. When they have achieved their goals, they stop. They accept surrender. They take slaves and tribute." He shook his head. "Humans do not fight like that. When humans truly commit to war, they do not stop until their enemies are utterly destroyed. They do not accept surrender. They do not show mercy. They simply keep killing until there is nothing left to kill." His aide looked pale. "You think the humans can win?" "I think the Vexari have made a terrible mistake," Corvex said quietly. "They thought they were teaching humanity a lesson about power. Instead, they reminded humanity of what it really is. And what is that?" Corvex watched the last human ship disappear into the jump point, the most successful predator their planet ever produced. A species that survived by being more ruthless, more adaptable, and more persistent than anything else. A species that did not reach the top of its food chain through strength or speed, but through sheer, relentless determination to outlast everything that tried to kill it. He closed his eyes. The Vexari should have left them alone. They should have let humanity play at being peaceful traders and explorers. Instead, they awakened something that humanity had tried very hard to put to sleep. In the command center of the Vexari Dominion, Admiral Vexros reviewed the intelligence reports on the human fleet. He sat in a chair made from the bones of conquered species and drank wine from a cup carved from the skull of a rebel leader. He was not impressed. 187 ships, he said dismissively. "We have already destroyed human colonies with a fraction of that force. What can they hope to accomplish?" His subordinate hesitated. "Admiral, our analysts have noted some unusual features in the human designs. Their weapons appear to be quite different from standard galactic technology." Vexros laughed. "The humans are a primitive species. They have been spacefaring for less than 500 years. What could they possibly know about war that we have not learned in 10 millennia? The analysts also note that human history contains many examples of smaller forces defeating larger ones through unconventional tactics." "Bah." Vexros waved his hand dismissively. "Those were battles between humans, fighting among themselves with their crude weapons. They have never faced a proper military power. They will break and run at the first engagement, just like every other minor species we have crushed." He stood and walked to the window of his command center. Below him, the capital city of Vexar Prime stretched to the horizon. 12 billion Vexari lived on this world alone. Their empire spanned hundreds of systems. They had ruled this region of the galaxy for 10,000 years. "Send a message to the frontier fleets," he ordered. "Tell them to intercept the human ships and destroy them. I want the battle broadcast on all channels. Let the galaxy see what happens to species that dare to challenge the Dominion." He smiled coldly. "And then we will go to Earth itself. We will burn their homeworld just as we burned New Geneva. We will kill them all, down to the last child, and we will do it slowly, so that the galaxy never forgets the price of defiance. In the depths of space, the human fleet moved in perfect formation. Admiral Chen sat in her command chair and reviewed the tactical displays. Ahead of them, Vexari scout ships were already tracking their approach. The enemy would know exactly where they were and where they were going. That was fine. Chen wanted them to know. She touched a control on her chair arm. A hologram appeared in the air before her. It showed the face of a young woman with dark hair and bright eyes, Maya Torres, commander of the New Geneva Colonial Defense Force. The last human to die on that world, Earth, the hologram said. Remember us, remember what they did, and make them pay. Chen watched the recording loop 3 times. Then she closed it and looked out at the stars. We remember, she said quietly. And they will pay. The fleet jumped to light speed. The war had begun. The Vexari fleet commander looked at his tactical display and smiled. 300 warships under his command, each one crewed by veterans of a dozen campaigns. Against them, a ragged human fleet of less than 200 vessels. This would not be a battle. It would be an execution. Move to intercept, he ordered. Standard formation. Let us show these primitives what happens when they challenge the Dominion. The Vexari ships spread out in a classic pincer maneuver. It was a tactic they had used for thousands of years. The enemy would be surrounded and crushed from all sides. Simple, elegant, and effective. The human fleet did not attempt to maneuver. They simply flew straight toward the Vexari formation, as if they did not understand the danger. The commander laughed. They do not even know how to fight, he said. This will be over in minutes. The 2 fleets closed to weapons range. The Vexari opened fire first, sending streams of plasma bolts toward the human ships. The energy weapons were devastating against conventional shields. A single hit could cripple a smaller vessel. The plasma bolts struck the human ships, and nothing happened. The commander stared at his display in confusion. The human shields were not failing. The plasma energy was being absorbed, redirected, dissipated. His weapons, which had shattered the defenses of 100 species, were doing almost no damage. What is happening? He demanded. Before anyone could answer, the humans returned fire. The Vexari had never encountered railgun technology. Their species had developed energy weapons early and never looked back. They did not understand what was happening when small metal objects began punching through their shields as if they were not there. Shields were designed to stop energy. They were not designed to stop solid matter moving at significant fractions of light speed. The first Vexari ship exploded as a metal slug tore through its reactor. Then another. Then a dozen more. The human weapons fired continuously, each shot precisely aimed at critical systems, engine cores, command centers, weapon arrays. The commander screamed orders, trying to reorganize his fleet. But the human ships were already among them, moving with impossible speed and coordination. They seemed to know exactly where the Vexari shields were weakest. They seemed to predict every maneuver before it happened. Electronic warfare. The commander realized it too late. The humans had infiltrated his communication systems. They were reading his orders before his own ships received them. They were feeding false information to his sensors. They were turning his fleet blind and deaf. He tried to retreat. The humans did not let him. The battle lasted 4 hours. When it was over, 200 Vexari ships were expanding clouds of debris. 100 more were crippled and drifting. The survivors fled toward the inner systems, broadcasting desperate warnings to anyone who would listen. The human fleet had lost 12 ships. Admiral Chen surveyed the battlefield from the Bridge of the Remembrance. Around her, crew members worked in focused silence, already preparing for the next engagement. There was no celebration, no cheering. This was not a victory to be celebrated. It was simply the first step in a long journey. Admiral, her communications officer reported, we are receiving transmissions from across the galaxy. Other species are requesting more information about the battle. Chen nodded. Let them watch. Let them see what happens to those who attack humanity. She turned to her tactical officer. What is the status of the enemy survivors? 63 Vexari vessels escaped. They are heading for the core worlds at maximum speed. They will reach reinforcement range within 2 days. Let them run. Chen's voice was cold. I want the Dominion to know we are coming. I want them to have time to prepare their defenses. I want them to gather every ship they have in one place. Her tactical officer looked uncertain. Admiral, if they concentrate their remaining forces, they will still outnumber us significantly. Yes, Chen smiled. It was not a pleasant expression. And they will still lose. The human fleet moved deeper into Vexari space. They did not stop to occupy worlds or accept surrenders. They simply destroyed everything military they encountered and moved on. Orbital defense platforms were reduced to rubble. Shipyards were blown apart. Military bases were bombarded from orbit until nothing remained but craters. Any vessel capable of combat was hunted down and eliminated. But the human fleet did not attack civilian targets. They did not kill unarmed populations. When they approached a Vexari world, they broadcast a simple message: "We are not here for your people. We are here for your military. Evacuate all combat-capable personnel and equipment within 6 hours, or they will be destroyed where they stand. Civilians who remain in designated areas will not be harmed." Some Vexari commanders tried to hide military assets among civilian populations, hoping the humans would hesitate. They learned quickly that humans did not hesitate. The weapons came down precisely where they were aimed. Military targets died. Civilians in the designated areas survived. It was not mercy, it was efficiency. The humans were not interested in conquest. They were interested in destruction. The galaxy watched in growing amazement. This was not how wars were fought. The Vexari had always slaughtered civilian populations to break enemy morale. Every other species that had fought them had done the same. War meant death for everyone, combatant and non-combatant alike. But the humans were different. They killed with terrible precision. They destroyed only what needed to be destroyed. They were not cruel or sadistic like the Vexari. They were simply cold, methodical, relentless. Ambassador Corvex of the Talani Union watched the latest battle reports in his office. The Vexari had lost another 50 ships trying to defend a major shipyard. The humans had lost 4. "This is impossible," his aide said. "The Vexari have been dominant for 10,000 years. How can a species that has only been spacefaring for a few centuries defeat them so completely?" Corvex considered the question carefully. "The Vexari have been dominant because no one has seriously challenged them. They fought against species that were already weakened by internal conflicts. They conquered worlds that had no unified defense. They have never faced an enemy that was truly committed to total war. But the humans were peaceful traders before New Geneva. They had almost no military. They had no military because they chose not to have one." Corvex pulled up records from human history on his display. "Look at their past. 2 world wars in a single century. Nuclear weapons developed and deployed. Chemical and biological weapons stockpiled by the millions. They nearly destroyed themselves a dozen times." He zoomed in on images from human history. Trenches filled with bodies. Cities reduced to ash. Mushroom clouds rising over burning landscapes. They chose peace not because they were incapable of war, but because they were too good at it. They looked at what they had done to themselves and decided to stop. But the knowledge was still there. The instincts were still there. The Vexari simply reminded them who they really are. On the Vexari homeworld, panic was spreading. The military high command had been in continuous session for days. Report after report came in, each one worse than the last. The humans were cutting through their defenses like a hot knife through ice. Admiral Vexros stood before the Empress herself, trying to explain how his invincible fleet had been shattered. He looked pale and thin. He had not slept in 3 days. "Your Majesty," he said, his voice trembling. "We underestimated them. We thought they were like the other young species we have conquered. We were wrong." The Empress was ancient by Vexari standards, over 2,000 years old. She had ruled the Dominion for 8 centuries. She had seen rebellions rise and fall. She had never felt fear. She felt it now. "How many ships do we have left?" she asked. 400 combat-capable vessels, Your Majesty. We have recalled everything from the frontier territories. It is all we have." "And the humans?" "They have lost approximately 30 ships in total. They have captured or destroyed over 600 of ours." Vexros swallowed hard. "Your Majesty, their weapons are beyond anything we have encountered. Their tactics are unlike any we have seen. They do not fight for glory or territory. They fight to exterminate." The Empress was silent for a long moment. "Send a message to the human fleet. she said finally. Offer them terms. We will pay reparations for New Geneva. We will withdraw from human space. We will sign whatever treaties they demand. Vexros nodded eagerly. Yes, Your Majesty. I am sure they will accept reasonable terms. The message was sent. The response came back within an hour. It was 4 words long. We haven't started yet. The Empress read the message 3 times. Then she looked at Vexros with eyes that had seen empires rise and fall. Gather every ship, she said quietly. Every soldier, every weapon. Bring them to Vexor Prime. We will make our stand here. Your Majesty, if we concentrate all our forces here and lose, then we lose everything. The Empress stood and walked to the window of her throne room. Below her, the capital city stretched to the horizon. 12 billion of her people lived on this world. But if we scatter our forces, we lose anyway. The humans will hunt us down one by one. Our only hope is to defeat them here. In one decisive battle, she turned back to Vexros. You broadcast the death of their colony for entertainment. You laughed as you killed their children. Did you think there would be no consequence? Did you think they would simply accept it? Vexros had no answer. Prepare the defenses, the Empress ordered. The humans are coming, and we will face them with everything we have. In the void between stars, the human fleet gathered. Admiral Chen reviewed the intelligence reports on the Vexari defenses. 400 warships, orbital weapons platforms, ground-based anti-ship batteries, a population of 12 billion potential hostages. The Vexari were trapped. They had nowhere left to run. Admiral, her tactical officer reported. The enemy has consolidated all remaining forces around their homeworld. They appear to be preparing for a final stand. Chen nodded. Good. This ends at Vexor Prime. She looked at the tactical display. The Vexari still outnumbered them 2 to 1. Their homeworld defenses were formidable. By any reasonable calculation, the battle ahead would be devastating. But Chen did not care about reasonable calculations. She cared about justice. She cared about the 6 million names that scrolled endlessly across the walls of her quarters. She cared about making sure no other human colony would ever suffer the fate of New Geneva. Set course for Vexor Prime, she ordered. Maximum speed. The fleet turned toward the heart of the Dominion. The final battle was approaching, and humanity was ready. The human fleet dropped out of light speed at the edge of the Vexari home system. Admiral Chen stood at the center of her bridge and watched as her tactical displays filled with information. 400 Vexari warships formed a defensive sphere around their homeworld. Orbital platforms bristled with weapons. Ground-based batteries tracked the approaching human vessels. It was an impressive display of military power. The Vexari had concentrated everything they had left in one place. They were ready to fight to the last ship. Chen studied the formation for several minutes. Her officers waited in tense silence. The enemy outnumbered them significantly. The defensive positions were strong. A direct assault would be costly. Admiral, her tactical officer said quietly. Shall I begin attack planning? Chen shook her head slowly. Not yet. I want to talk to them first. She pressed a control on her chair. Her image appeared on every Vexari screen in the system. This is Admiral Sarah Chen of the United Earth Navy, she said. I am addressing the Vexari Dominion directly. 6 months ago, you killed 6 million of our people on New Geneva. You broadcast their deaths for entertainment. You laughed as children burned. Her voice was calm, steady, empty of emotion. Since then, we have destroyed over 600 of your warships. We have eliminated your military infrastructure across 100 systems. Your empire is broken. Your fleet is reduced to what stands before us now. She paused to let her words sink in. I have come to offer you a choice. Surrender unconditionally. Dismantle your remaining military forces. Submit to human oversight of your government and society. Accept permanent restrictions on your ability to wage war. Do this, and your people will live. Her eyes hardened. Refuse, and we will destroy everything. Every ship, every weapon, every military installation on your homeworld. We will not stop until the Vexari Dominion no longer has the ability to threaten anyone ever again. She leaned forward slightly. You have 1 hour to respond. Choose wisely. The transmission ended. Chen sat back in her chair and waited. On the Vexari homeworld, the Empress gathered her advisors in the throne room. The human message played on screens around them. The faces of the Vexari leaders showed a mixture of fear and wounded pride. "We cannot surrender," one admiral insisted. "We are the Vexari Dominion. We have ruled this region of space for 10,000 years. We do not submit to inferior species." "Inferior?" Another advisor laughed bitterly. "They have destroyed 2/3 of our fleet. They have technology we do not understand. If that is inferior, I do not want to see what superior looks like. If we surrender, we lose everything," the first admiral argued. "Our empire, our honor, our identity. If we fight, we lose our lives," the other replied. "The humans do not take prisoners. They do not accept partial victories. They will destroy us completely." The Empress raised her hand, silencing the argument. She was very old now, and very tired. The weight of 2,000 years pressed down on her shoulders. "I watched the broadcast from New Geneva," she said quietly. "I approved it. I thought it would teach the humans to fear us. I thought it would show the galaxy that the Dominion was still strong." She closed her eyes. "I was wrong. I did not understand what humans are. I did not understand what we awakened." She opened her eyes and looked at her advisors. "Send our response. Tell the humans we surrender. Unconditionally. We will accept whatever terms they demand." The message was sent. The human fleet received it in silence. Admiral Chen read the surrender offer carefully. Around her, officers exchanged glances. They had fought across 100 light-years for this moment. They had lost friends and comrades. They had watched the recording of New Geneva hundreds of times, burning every detail into their memories. And now the enemy was offering to give up. "Admiral," her tactical officer said. "Orders?" Chen did not respond immediately. She pulled up the recording of New Geneva one more time. She watched Maya Torres stand tall before the cameras. She watched the Vexari soldiers laugh as they killed. She watched 6 million people die. Then she pulled up another display. The current population of Vexar Prime, 12 billion souls. 12 billion people who had not personally killed anyone on New Geneva. 12 billion people who would die if she gave the order. She thought about what that would make her, what it would make humanity. "Admiral?" Her officer's voice was uncertain. "Do we accept their surrender?" Chen was silent for a long moment. On her display, the orbital bombardment systems showed ready status. A single command would rain fire on the planet below. She could avenge New Geneva 1,000-fold. She could make sure no Vexari ever threatened anyone again. The temptation was overwhelming. The rage was still there, burning in her chest. 6 million voices crying out for justice. 6 million names demanding vengeance. She looked at the faces of her bridge crew. They were waiting for her decision. Some of them wanted her to push the button. Some of them were horrified by the possibility. All of them would follow her orders without question. That was the most terrifying thing of all. Chen stood up slowly and walked to the main view screen. The Vexari homeworld hung in space before her. Blue and green, like Earth. Cities glittered on the night side. Ships floated in orbit. Weapons powered down, waiting to learn their fate. "When I was a child," she said quietly, "my grandmother told me stories about Earth's history. She told me about the wars we fought, the terrible things we did to each other, the weapons we built to destroy ourselves." She turned to face her crew. "She also told me about the moments when we chose differently, when we could have continued killing and chose to stop, when we could have taken revenge and chose mercy instead. She said those moments defined us more than our victories. They proved that we were more than just clever apes with weapons." She walked back to her command chair but did not sit down. "The Vexari killed 6 million of our people. They did it with cruelty and contempt. They deserve to burn for what they did. Every instinct I have screams at me to give the order, to avenge our dead, to make sure this can never happen again." She paused. "But I keep thinking about what comes after. If we destroy them, what do we become? Just another empire built on corpses. Just another species that solves its problems through extinction. The Vexari did that for 10,000 years. Look where it got them." She looked at the planet on the screen. "We came here for justice. Justice is not the same as revenge. Justice means punishment that fits the crime. Justice means making sure it cannot happen again. But justice does not require us to become monsters ourselves." She sat down in her chair. "We will accept the surrender. The Vexari military will be completely dismantled. Their government will be restructured under human oversight. They will never again have the ability to threaten anyone, but their people will live. Her tactical officer stared at her. Admiral, after what they did, I know what they did. Chen's voice was sharp. I watch the recording every night. I know the names of every person who died on New Geneva. I carry them with me always. She softened slightly. That is why I am making this choice, because I do not want their sacrifice to turn us into the very thing we are fighting against. Maya Torres asked us to remember what they did. She asked us to make them pay. We have done both. The Vexari Dominion is destroyed. Their empire is gone. Their military is broken. They will spend the rest of their existence knowing that humanity defeated them, broke them, and then chose not to exterminate them. She smiled grimly. That is our revenge, not death. Mercy. Because mercy is something the Vexari never showed anyone. And every day they wake up alive, they will remember that humans were better than them. That is a punishment that will last forever. She opened a channel to the Vexari fleet. This is Admiral Chen. Your surrender is accepted. Power down all weapons immediately. Prepare to receive human inspection teams. Any resistance will be met with immediate destruction. But if you comply, your people will survive. She paused. You killed 6 million of us and expected submission. Instead, we broke your empire and conquered your homeworld. You showed us cruelty. We show you restraint. Remember this day. Remember what you did. And remember what we chose not to do. That is the difference between your species and ours. The transmission ended. Across the Vexari fleet, weapons powered down. Ships moved into surrender positions. On the surface of the planet, soldiers laid down their arms. The war was over. Admiral Chen watched the surrender proceed in silence. Around her, crew members worked to coordinate the massive logistics of accepting the capitulation of an entire species. Some of them looked relieved. Some looked disappointed. Some simply looked exhausted. She pulled up the recording of New Geneva one more time. Maya Torres stared at her from across time and space. We remembered, Chen said quietly. And we made them pay. But we did it our way. I hope that is enough. She closed the recording and turned back to her duties. There was much work to be done. 20 years had passed since the end of the war. The galaxy was a different place now. The Vexari Dominion existed only in history books. Their military had been completely dismantled. Their government had been restructured under human oversight. Their worlds had been demilitarized and monitored by international observers. But the Vexari people survived. 12 billion of them on their homeworld. Billions more scattered across their former empire. They lived, worked, raised families, and tried to rebuild their civilization under the watchful eyes of humanity. Some of them were grateful. They knew what the humans could have done. They knew that Admiral Chen had held the power to destroy them completely and had chosen to show mercy. Every day they woke up alive was a gift they had not earned. Others were bitter. They remembered the glory days of the Dominion. They mourned their lost empire. They hated the humans who had humiliated them. But even they knew better than to speak their hatred too loudly. The human ships still patrolled their space. The human monitors still watched their activities. The human weapons still stood ready. On Earth, the war had changed everything. Humanity was no longer a minor species playing at galactic politics. They were a major power, respected and feared throughout known space. Other species sought alliances with them. Former enemies begged for protection. The New Geneva Memorial hung in orbit around the sun, visible from every planet in the solar system. It was a vast structure, built of black stone quarried from 100 worlds. On its surface, 6 million names were carved in letters of gold. Each name was accompanied by a small holographic portrait, showing the face of someone who had been loved, who had mattered, who would never be forgotten. Every year on the anniversary of the massacre, ships from across the galaxy came to pay their respects. Representatives from 100 species gathered to remember what had happened and to renew their commitment to preventing it from happening again. Admiral Sarah Chen, now in her 70s, still made the pilgrimage every year. Her hair was completely white now, and she walked with the aid of a cane, but her eyes were still sharp, and her mind was still clear. She stood before the section of the memorial that bore the name of Maya Torres. Around her, dignitaries and civilians moved quietly through the vast space. Candles flickered in zero gravity, creating rivers of light that flowed through the darkness. 20 years, she said quietly. Sometimes it feels like yesterday. Sometimes it feels like a lifetime. A young woman approached her hesitantly. She was dressed in the uniform of the Vexari Diplomatic Corps, but her face was uncertain, almost fearful. Her blue-gray skin and 4 arms marked her as a full-blooded Vexari. "Admiral Chen," she said, "I am sorry to disturb you. My name is Corvana. I am a historian from the University of Vexar Prime." Chen turned to look at her. The young Vexari was barely 30 years old. She had been a child when the war ended. She had grown up in a world shaped by human victory and Vexari defeat. "What can I do for you?" Chen asked. Corvana hesitated. "I have been writing a history of the war. I have studied the records, read the documents, interviewed survivors from both sides. But there is one question I cannot answer. One question that has haunted me since I began this project." "What question?" Corvana looked at the memorial around them. At the 6 million names. At the faces of the dead. "Why?" she asked simply. "You had the power to destroy us. You had every reason to do it. After what we did to your people, after the broadcast, after everything, why did you let us live?" Chen was silent for a long moment. She had been asked this question many times over the years, by journalists and historians, by politicians and philosophers, by humans and aliens alike. She had given many different answers, depending on the situation and the audience. But this young Vexari deserved the truth. "I almost did not," Chen admitted. "When I sat in that command chair, looking at your homeworld, I wanted nothing more than to push the button, to avenge our dead, to make sure your people could never hurt anyone again." She turned to face Corvana directly. "But I kept thinking about what would happen next. If we destroyed you, we would spend the rest of our history as the species that committed genocide. We would be defined by that act forever. Every other species would look at us and see mass murderers." She gestured at the memorial. "And I thought about the people who died here. They were not soldiers or warriors. They were teachers and farmers, doctors and artists, parents and children. They lived peaceful lives. They wanted nothing more than to raise their families and contribute to their community." Her voice softened. "If we had destroyed your people, we would have become the very thing they died opposing. We would have proved that the Vexari were right about us, that we were just another violent species, no better than anyone else." She looked at Maya Torres's name carved in gold. "So I chose differently, not because your people deserved mercy. You did not. But because we deserve to be better than that. We deserve to prove that humanity could be strong without being cruel, that we could win without losing our souls." Corvana was quiet for a moment. "In my research," she said finally, "I found a quote from one of your ancient philosophers. He said that the measure of a civilization is not how it treats its friends, but how it treats its enemies." Chen nodded slowly. "That sounds like something my grandmother would have said." "I have written my conclusion," Corvana said. "Would you like to hear it?" Chen gestured for her to continue. Corvana took a deep breath. "I wrote that the Vexari showed humanity our cruelty and expected submission. Instead, they showed us their fury and then, impossibly, their mercy. We killed 6 million of them and deserved annihilation. They broke our empire and gave us survival. That is why they terrify us still. Not because of what they can destroy, but because of what they choose to spare." Chen felt tears forming in her eyes. She had not cried in a very long time. "That is well said," she managed. Corvana bowed her head. "I have one more question, Admiral. If I may ask, the humans I have met, the ones who serve in the monitoring forces on my homeworld, they are kind. They help us rebuild. They teach our children. They treat us with respect, even though we do not deserve it." She looked up at Chen with something like wonder in her eyes. "How can they be the same species that built the weapons that destroyed our fleet? How can they be capable of such destruction and such compassion?" Chen smiled sadly. "Because we are human. We contain multitudes. We are capable of the greatest cruelty and the greatest kindness, the greatest hatred and the greatest love. We spent 10,000 years figuring out which parts of ourselves to nurture and which to restrain." She reached out and touched Corvana's shoulder gently. "Your people made a mistake. You saw our kindness and thought it was weakness. You did not understand that we chose to be kind, that we were always capable of being something else. The Vexari learned that lesson the hard way. But you learned it. That is why you are here, asking these questions. That is why there is hope for your people." Corvana stood very still for a moment. Then, to Chen's surprise, she bowed deeply in the traditional Vexari gesture of profound respect. "Thank you, Admiral, for your words and for your mercy." She walked away, disappearing into the crowds of visitors that moved through the memorial. Chen watched her go. Then she turned back to the wall of names. She found Maya Torres's face in the holographic display. The young commander looked back at her, frozen in time, forever brave, forever defiant. "Someone had to be better," Chen said quietly. "We decided it would be us." She stood there for a long time, surrounded by the names of the dead, thinking about the choices that had shaped two species. The galaxy moved on around her. Ships came and went. People lived their lives. And 6 million candles burned on. One for each soul lost on New Geneva. One for each person who had paid the price of human mercy. One for each name that would never, ever be forgotten. The memorial hung in space, silent and eternal. It was more than a monument to the dead. It was a promise to the living. A promise that humanity would remember what it was capable of, what it had chosen not to become. That was the true legacy of New Geneva. Not the war, not the victory, not even the mercy. The legacy was the choice itself. The proof that strength and compassion could exist together. That a species could destroy everything and choose to spare it instead. The Vexari had tried to teach humanity a lesson about power. In the end, humanity had taught them a different lesson entirely. Some battles are won by those who fight the hardest, but some battles are won by those who know when to stop.